Kia ora koutou. Today we're going to be talking about data cleanup. When you have significant amounts of data in Vernon and multiple cataloguers, it's common to have duplicate or missing data. So today we'll talk about some of the ways that you can evaluate your data and then how you can clean it up. The first thing that we'll look at is a tool called Field Usage Count, and it's under the Tools menu, Utilities, Field Usage Count. This tool gives you information on things like which fields are being used and which are not being used, the number of records using each field, the total number of records in the file, and the internal field name of each field. You can use the Field Usage Count tool to show those fields which are almost always used so that you can find the ones that don't have data in that field and complete them, and show those fields that are hardly ever used, in which case you might decide to put that data in another field. Let's run a Field Usage Count report. In the file name field, this is where you choose the file that you want to report on, like object or person. So in this case, I'll enter object. Within the list area, you can restrict it to a particular list if you want, and you can also choose to show the unused field. In this case, I'm going to send my report to the table format, and that's because I'm going to copy that table to Excel so that I can use Excel's functionality to do some further analysis on the report. So from here, I just click OK. And here's my report. And I've got the field name, the internal field name, and the usage count, so how many records that's used in. And at this point, I will go to Edit, Copy Table to Excel, and that's going to open up that table in Excel. So from here, I can sort this table by the usage count by going to the Sort menu, Custom Sort. I'll choose the usage count field, and I'm going to order it from Z to A so that the highest number is at the top. And here we can see that out of my 279 records, there are some fields which are always used, and that includes things like the updated by field, which is recorded automatically, and the procedural status, which is a mandatory field. I can also see that for the brief description field, there's a couple of records that are missing that information. For the department field, a few records are missing that. And even for our accession number, there's a few records that are missing that data. If I go to the fields with the least number of usage, I can see that there's some where maybe only a few records have that information. And that might be absolutely fine, and it makes sense that there would only be a few records with that data recorded. But you might also decide that actually that data is in the wrong place and we want to put it somewhere else. But let's look at how we can find those records where brief description and department are missing. So we'll go back into Vernon and we will do an advanced search on the object file. So I'm going to look in the list of search fields for the brief description field, select it, click Next, and in the search for field, I'm not going to put anything. I'm going to leave that blank. Then when I click Next, I've found my two records with brief description missing, and I can click Finish to open up a browse list of those records. And I could tidy those up by entering that information. So I could do the same for the department field. So if I open up Advanced Search, then I can do a search on the department field, select it, click Next, and again, I'm not going to enter anything in the search for field. I'll leave that blank. And now I've found my 6 records that are missing data in the department field. So I could go through each of these and enter that information. You can do a similar search for images. So you can see if an object record has images attached, or find the ones that don't, by doing a search on the photo audio visual field. So I've selected photo audio visual in the object file. I'll click next. I'll leave this field blank. And I found 36 records that don't have images attached. So I could save that as a list, and I could come back to that later when I had my images ready and load that onto those. Not all fields are indexed in advanced search, and that's because indexing every field would slow Vernon down when saving records. So we don't index every field, and the field that I'm interested in is current condition description. So I'll do a search here for condition, and I can see I've got condition person, condition keyword, condition date, but I don't have current condition description, and that's the field that I want to search on and see where I've got missing data. So instead I can do a select statement. So with a select statement, you can search on any field in Vernon. What I'm going to do here is type without space, and then I'm going to enter the internal field name for current condition description, which is condition _ desk. And when I press enter, Vernon will turn it into capital letters, and it'll put select object at the start. So it says select object without condition description. And I found 267 records that don't have the current condition description field completed. So that's how you can find fields that aren't indexed. You can find them with a select statement, and you can find the ones that don't have data in them by typing without a space and then the internal field name. And you can find the internal field name for a field by clicking into any field and going to the Help menu, Database Information, or by pressing Alt F1 on your keyboard. And that opens up this little Database Information window, and the internal field name is listed there. And you can generally just ignore anything after that in brackets. And you can have that window open and just click through different fields to find the internal field name. When you click into a table, it will list each of the internal field names in order. So let's have a look at authority terms and how you can find out how authority terms are used in your records. So you can go to the Tools menu, Authority Tool, Authority Term Report Replace. So this tool will tell you things like where a term is used, how often it's used, and even if it's not used. So in this case, I'm interested in the object type file. So I can type in here, object type. And in this area here, which is authority terms to report on or to be replaced, I'm going to select book. So that's the term that I'm interested in. And I'm going to click the report button to run a report on that term. That term is found in 35 records, and then it'll give me a list of all of the records where that term is found. So we have the authority term book with its system ID 9, and we can see that it's used 35 times and it's across these different records here. I can also report on the entire object type file by ticking this option here, and again just click report. It'll take a little bit longer to run this report, and it'll show me where each term is used, which records it's used in, and how often it's used. So I can see, for example, that for the authority term bowl, with its system ID of 12, it's used once, and this is the record in which it's used. The authority term toy, with its system ID of 20, that's used 4 times. I can find out if any terms in this file are unused, And I just tick this option here, unused terms only, and I'll run that report again. And the report tells me that the authority term coin is not used at all. So I've decided that I want to get rid of that term. So I'll untick entire file, and here I'll enter coin. And then I'll select this replace option up here, which opens up these options. I'm not going to replace it with anything, so I'll leave that blank. And where it says action on current term, meaning this term here, I'll choose delete. So I'm going to just completely delete this term from the object type file. And I'll do that by clicking replace. And that's all done. We can also use the authority term report replace tool to replace authority terms. And this is really helpful with fixing duplicate records. So I'm going to look at an example where we have duplicate person records in our system. And this is fairly common. When you have variations on spelling, or when you have multiple catalogers, perhaps somebody didn't realize that that person record was already in the system. If I do a search on Vernon, I can see that I have two records for Bill Vernon. We have this one here with 1L, which is the correct spelling of his name. And that's the first record in our person file. That's often another good indicator that the original term with a lower number is quite often going to be the correct one. And this one here, Bill Vernon with 2 L's, its system ID is 281, which is the 281st record that's created in the person file. So I'm going to open up both of those and just take a closer look. So this one here is the duplicate with 2 L's, so that's an incorrect spelling. And the system ID number is 281. And here we have the correct record. So this is the original record. We can see that we have an email address. But I also note that on the duplicate record, somebody has added additional information which we don't want to lose. So I want to delete this record and replace it with the original one, but I want to make sure that I don't lose any data while I do that. So what I'll do is click into this table of data in the duplicate record. Then I'll move to the original record. I'm still in the same table, and I can go edit, copy from previous field, copy all cells. And that was all the data that was additional to the data that's on this original record. There was no other information on the duplicate record. So I can just go ahead and delete this one now. I've got all the data that I need. But another thing that I'll check is in this person roles window, for my duplicate record, I can see that he's actually attached to an object record in the role of depositor on this record 1999.13. So when I do my authority term replacement, what Vernon will do is actually connect that to the right record. So let's go through that process. I'll close both of my records there, because when you do any kind of bulk tool, you want to make sure that you have your records closed. Otherwise, Vernon will see them as being locked and it won't be able to work with them or update them. So I'll go into the Tools menu, Authority Tool, Authority Term Report Replace. And this time I'm looking in the person file. I will enter the term to report on or be replaced. So this is the one that I want to replace. So this is Bill Vernon with 2 L's, the duplicate record. And I'll choose the replace option here. And here I'll enter Bill Vernon with 1 L, which is the original correct record. And what I want to do with the duplicate is delete it and get rid of it. So when I click replace, it'll tell me that this authority term is found in one record. So that's the one where he's listed as a depositor. And it's saying to me, do you want to go ahead and perform the replacement? Yes, I do. And do I want to delete the term yes? So that's all done. And now if I look up the object record that the duplicate person record was listed on, now we have the correct bill Vernon there, and the other one is gone. Let's look at how we can clean up some of our location information. I'm going to go to the database menu, other files, and then in the other field, I'll type location so that I can open up the location file. And in the search bar, I'm going to enter a right square bracket, which is a search operator, meaning starts with. And when you do this, Vernon will open up a list of all of the options for this particular file, because we're saying starts with anything. So I'll enter a right square bracket and press enter. That opens up all of my location terms. When I'm looking at location terms, I like to use this button here, show top terms. That shows all of the main areas, and then those are further broken down into rooms, racks, cases, and so on. So we have the exhibition hall here, and I've realized that actually the exhibition hall has 2 rooms in it, and all of the cases are in room 1. So there's a couple of things I need to do to clean up this hierarchy. I need to create rooms 1 and 2, which I'll put directly under exhibition hall. And then I need to put all the cases in room 1. So that's what I'll do. I'll create my first term, room 1, and in next higher term, I'll enter exhibition hall. I'll save that. Then I'll create room 2. And it will also have exhibition hall as its next higher term. So now when I look at my list of authority terms, I can see that in the exhibition hall, I now have room 1 and 2. So my next step is to move these cases into room 1. So I'm going to search on case, select all of those in a browse list so I can work through them. So for each of them, I'm going to change their next higher term to room 1 in the exhibition hall. So now when I look at my list of location terms, and I go to top terms, I can see that in the exhibition hall, I now have room 1 and 2, and the cases are in room 1. So something else that we can do with locations, or in fact any authority term, is control how it's used, and that's done through something called term usage control. So I'm going to look up the Vernon Systems Museum, which is one of our top terms here, Vernon Systems Museum. And that's where all of our storerooms and areas are located. And I don't want anyone to choose Vernon Systems Museum as a location because it's too broad. I want them to navigate down through the hierarchy and choose a more specific location. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the Vernon Systems Museum term, I'm going to make it retrievable but not usable, and I'll show you what that means. So once you start opening up other files through the database other files method, you'll see them listed in the navigator down the bottom under other files. So for this particular location term, Vernon Systems Museum, I'm going to open up the location authority management window. And here we have some term usage controls, and I'll talk about what these are. Usable is the default term. That means there's no restrictions on this term. Not usable means that you can't search for the term and you can't enter it into a field. And that is really useful for a historical location that is no longer used, So if you have an old location, don't delete it, make it not usable. And that means that it forms a part of that important history of objects and their locations. So in this case, I'm going to choose retrievable but not usable. And that means that you can search for the term, you can see it in the authority options, but you can't actually select it or enter it into a field. So now I'll save that change. And now if I go into an object record, if I open up the location window, let's have a look at it in this usual location table. If I try to choose the Vernon Systems Museum, we can see that it says RNU in front of it, and that means retrievable but not usable, and it's grayed out. And if I try to select it, it tells me that it's a non-usable term. So I'm forced to choose a more specific location. The next tool that I'd like to talk to you about is one for finding and replacing text, and it's called Text Find and Replace, and it's under the Tools menu, Text Find and Replace. So this is similar to what you might use in Microsoft Word. It's helpful for when you're fixing spelling errors, if you're wanting to capitalize a name, or change any text for any reason. So this looks in the text fields, and I'm going to start off by choosing the object file. Then I'm going to choose the field that I want to look in, and I want to change in all brief descriptions where we mention Auckland. I want to change that to Tamaki Makaurau and then Auckland in brackets. So this is the Māori name for Auckland. And I'll also use this opportunity to show you how in any text field you can use the character map. So I need to put a macron over the A there. So I'll click the zoom button. And then if I click on edit, character map, there's all sorts of characters that you can use in text fields. In this case, there's the A with a macron above it that I need. I'll click select, then copy, close the character map window, and then I can paste that character in. So the next thing I need to do is find the records that I want to update. So I've got the file, I've got the field, I've got the text to search for, the text to replace it with, and now I need to say which records. So I'm going to do a search on the brief description field for Auckland. I've got 19 records, and now I can click update. It'll ask me, is this one that you want to be updated? And I can do it record by record, or I can just click all records. That's what I'll do in this case, and it'll go through each of those records, and it will update the brief description for me. Another example of updating data in bulk is our bulk update tool. In this example, let's say our data standards are to always have a condition keyword for our objects, and we found that the objects in the art storeroom are missing this data. We can go to the Tools menu, Bulk Update. And let's say I've been to the art storeroom, I've checked all of the objects in there, and they're all in good condition. So I can apply the same data to a group of records using the Bulk Update tool. The first thing I do is choose the file that I want to update, which is the object file. Then I'll search for my records, and I'm going to search on them based on their current location, which is the art storeroom. I can use the options button to select art storeroom. Click next. We've got 13 objects in the storeroom. And now in this area, fields to update, I can say which field I want to update and the data that I want to apply. So in this case, I'm going to update the condition field. And the data that I want to apply is that the keyword is good, it's in good condition, and the action is to append to the bottom. And now I can press the down arrow on my keyboard, which is what you do with any table in Vernon if you want to add a new row. press the down arrow on the keyboard, and then you can fill in the other fields. So in this case, I'm going to also update the condition date. I'll enter T for today. And then lastly, who was it that did the condition report? And then I can click OK to go ahead and update those 13 records with that information, and it's all done. Let's say you've recently moved some of your collection into a new area. You can move objects in bulk by using the bulk move function, which is under Tools, Location Functions, Bulk Move. You use bulk move when you want to apply the same location data to all of them. So if they're all moving into the same place, you could also choose to do this in batches. So you might have one group of records that are all moving to one location and another group of records that are moving to another location. At the top here, this top half of the window is where we choose the objects or packing units that we want to move. And down the bottom is where we want to move them to. So in this case, I'm going to get a particular list of records. We have a group of prints. So I'm going to move these 11 prints into a new location. So I will fill out the details down here. So let's just say permanent exhibit. The authorizer was Bill Vernon. The person who moved it was Paul Rowe. Moving them to the exhibition hall. So now those records are processing and all being moved. It'll ask me if I want to perform another bulk move. So if you had another list of records that were going to another location, you could use that. The last tip that I'll give you is about a function that we have called random record selection. This is really useful when doing a data quality audit. You can select a set of random records from your system, and this is under Tools, Utilities, Random Record Selection. I'll enter the file that I want to select some random records from, and I've got a pre-saved list of records which I'm going to choose, and it's those that were updated this year. And I just want to check how the cataloging is going. So out of these 50 records, I'm going to choose 5 of them. You can also enter a percentage in this field. I'm just going to enter 5, and it's going to choose 5 random records from that list. And then I can look through those records and check the fields, check the information. This is a tool that you could use in a variety of ways. And so that was under Tools, Utilities, Random Record Selection.